There's a sailboat race that's like no other in the world, and people come from all over the world to run it. Boats are shipped to its starting line, records are set and beaten, and people die in the process. It's the longest, most exciting freshwater race in the world, and its trophies are the most coveted among sailors. And there aren't any YouTube videos really explaining it. So we're going to make one. This week on Historsea, the grueling, unpredictable, and wildly competitive Chicago to Mac race. The race is what it sounds like, basically a drag race up Lake Michigan from Chicago to Mackinac Island, or its shorter brother race, Port Huron to Mackinac Island, covering Lake Huron. Either way, sailors have to compete with the mighty Great Lakes, and as any lifelong ocean racer will tell you, the Great Lakes can be insanely challenging. I've sailed in both the Atlantic and most of the Great Lakes, and I can tell you the differences between them sort of firsthand. On the ocean, when it's blowing 20 or 30 knots, the waves are big, but kind of far apart. Whereas on the Great Lakes, because of the size, shape, and shallow depth of the lakes, the waves get a lot more violent. They get pointy and close together, and they seem to come from multiple directions sometimes. It really is a wild ride up here. The lakes usually get predominant wind from one direction, and because the lakes are long and skinny and shallow, the wind kicks up waves that get bigger and bigger from one end of the lake to the other. Boats are known to greatly defeat their theoretical hull speed by surfing these waves. My boat in particular has exceeded 13 knots when her hull speed should be 7. This race, which starts in Chicago, covers 333 miles up Lake Michigan, ending in Lake Huron off the shore of Mackinac Island, and it started way back in 1898, and it's hosted by the Chicago Yacht Club every year. The race always draws several hundred boats and thousands of sailors from all over the world. The race starts at Chicago Harbor Lighthouse just off Navy Pier. It crosses Lake Michigan and enters Lake Huron at the Straits of Mackinac and finishes in the Round Island Channel off Mackinac Island, Michigan. The race course runs 333 miles or 536 kilometers. In 2011, 361 boats entered the race, and Steve Fawcett set the overall record, full-on record, 18 hours and 50 minutes in 1998 with the multi-hull called Stars and Stripes. And Roy E. Disney set the mono-hull record, 23 hours and 30 minutes in Pyewacket in 2002. Like every good race, the Mac starts with a rivalry. A boat designer called Joseph Myers designed two different fin-keel sloops back in the 1800s. The 59-footer called Siren and the 64-footer called Venena. Little did he know at the time, these two boats would go on to have the greatest rivalry on the Great Lakes and spur the creation of the world's most famous and longest freshwater race. Both of those boats were built by the Racine Boat Manufacturing Company in 1886, and even in the boatyard when they were being built, there was talk about which boat would be faster. So they planned a race for when the boats were finished. When Siren and Venena were finished, the rivalry races began. It was 1896, and the race outcomes were not conclusive. The first race to Michigan City that they competed against each other in was disputed because, while Venena got there first and claimed the victory, Siren protested because she had older sails that were inadequate for the race, which is a typical race excuse if you ask me. So they planned another race to settle the score for good, but to this day, that second race, it was to Milwaukee, it's still in dispute over 100 years later because the fog that came in made it so that both sloops actually sailed off course. And the question became, did the race ever even finish? A couple of years passed until 1898 and the announcement for a series of 3 races sponsored by the Chicago Yacht Club to again settle which boat was fastest. The owners, George Peet of Siren and W.R. Crawford of Venena, set out to make the record straight. They agreed to a 3-day regatta, one race on June 4th, one on the 11th, and one on the 18th. Both owners engaged in a lot of boasting and betting and teasing each other, and they were prepared to spend whatever it took to win, which is still kind of the philosophy in sailboat racing today. After 3 races in June of 1898, Venena remained undefeated, and the discussion emerged to have a very unique and challenging race regularly that more boats could compete in rather than just the 2 rivals. In 1897, the New York Yacht Club sponsored a long-distance race like that, and they attracted a bunch of larger vessels. So the Chicago Yacht Club saw the opportunity to create its own attraction for larger vessels and renew the sport of sailing in the Chicago sailing community. Mackinac Island was a great idea because it was already a destination that a lot of sailboat owners favored, taking the sort of multi-port route up Lake Michigan, not doing it all in one shot. Many Chicago Yacht Club members throughout history had houses or stayed on the island for vacation. Those members conceived of a race that would challenge every sailor to the weather, the wind, storms, and the seas, as well as the big question, what course would you take to do a 333-mile hop all in one go? And so began the first Mack race with 2 sloops, Siren and Venena, of course, but also 3 schooners, the Hawthorne, the Toxteth, and the Nomad. The excitement was immediate, and the wagers and posturing began as they do before any sailboat race. And once again, Siren and Venena would dance with each other on the Great Lakes. After 52 grueling hours, Venena claimed first place, and the first winner of the Chicago to Mack race in history. Siren placed second, 37 minutes behind her nemesis, but she beat the schooners. Hawthorne she beat by 45 minutes. The Mack has evolved into a world-class sporting event now. After the first race in 1898, the race to Mackinac was not held for 5 years until the second race in 1904. By 1906, the race had developed into a big, huge, healthy following, and in that year, the original Mack Trophy was purchased. The race had seen occasional sustained violent weather in the blows like 1911, 1937, and again in 1970. After gale force winds took down most of the fleet of the Mack in 1911, the finish in 1912 and 13 races was changed to Harbor Springs on Little Traverse Bay instead of Mackinac Island to sort of play it safer. Race organizers felt also that the shorter distance would get more competition into the race. From 1914 to 1916, the Mack went back to its full distance all the way to Mackinac Island until World War I broke out. From 1917 to 1920, there were no Mack races due to the strains of the war, which took away a lot of the yachtsmen to go fight in the war, and it put a lot of boats out of commission. From 1921 to 2019, and returning in 2021, the race to Mackinac has been run consecutively every single year, and it remains the longest annual freshwater distance race, and it's recognized as one of the most prestigious sailing races in the world. Today, sailors from Maine to California make this race an inevitable part of their summer. Moreover, each year Mack hosts sailors from as far off as Hong Kong and New Zealand and Australia. And although the Mack remains primarily an amateur event, this race has a proven track record of attracting some of the finest sailing talent in the sport. The unpredictable weather and the fickle winds of Lake Michigan make the race to Mackinac a supreme test, with many competitors feeling it rivals any ocean race that there's ever been. As one veteran of the race said, "It's fun, but it's serious fun." 2008 marked the 110th anniversary of the first race, and the 100th time sailors raced 333 miles from Chicago all the way to Mackinac Island. Although there have been changes to the race over the years, the basic elements of this venerable contest have remained unchanged for 100 years. Stripped down to its essence, the Mack, like all sailboat racing, is still a primary test of strength, endurance, strategy, and willpower. And let's not forget the dearest friend and most menacing foe to all sailors, the wind. The Chicago Yacht Club race to Mackinac Island is often confused with the Port Huron race to Mackinac. They were held the same weekend every year until 1939, when both clubs agreed to alternate the date of their Mackinac races, scheduling them a week apart. So if you wanted to compete in both, you kind of could. 2020 and COVID saw the race go on hiatus and planned to return the next year. It was the first time in a century that the race was canceled. They don't cancel this thing for anything. It doesn't matter what the weather's doing, they're racing. Post-COVID, however, it's back on, and the 2023 race just ended. But of course, with such a long and grueling race, it hasn't been without incidents. While I have you, please take a second to give this video a thumbs up and hit the subscribe button to the channel. Both of those things are free for you and would really mean the world to me. And if you could please leave a comment below on what the next Historsea episode should be about. On the night of Sunday, 17th of July 2011, during the 103rd running of the race, 2 sailors died when a boat called Wingnuts, a high-performance keel sports boat, Kiwi 35, capsized and turtled in 75-mile-an-hour winds. These were the first race-related fatalities in the history of this race. Later inquiry said that the boat, specifically its high-performance, extremely wide, low-displacement hull, was unfit for the location, the weather, and the multi-day, lengthy race, and urged race officials to change the ratings and revoke privileges to enter the race. The waves on Lake Michigan that day were not all that unusual, but the wind was. The boat may have buried one of its hiking wings into a wave, causing it to trip over itself, and then had the other wave lifted by the wind. It's rare, but not unheard of for keelboats to turtle upside down and then remain upside down. However, this boat's unique hull form, which made it very, very fast, also rendered it more stable upside down than it was right side up. This was a recipe for disaster in that race. This loss happened despite a competent crew that had a lot of experience, which was very well equipped and prepared in every way necessary for the race. Wingnuts met the current offshore stability standards, which failed to adequately take into account the effect of the radical winged hull. On paper, Wingnuts met all the stability requirements for the Chicago to Mac race. The race required that all boats have an Offshore Racing Rule, or ORR, handicap measurement certificate, a document that includes 2 measures of stability, the limit of positive stability and the stability index. However, after that accident, the U.S. Sailing Panel found that the ORR formulas did not adequately penalize the Kiwi 35's extreme flare, the difference between the waterline beam and the maximum beam. When the panel eliminated a fixed lower limit for the capsize increment, one of the factors used in calculating stability index, Wingnut stability index went from 100.7 plummeting down to 74.4. No other boat in the race had the same drastic reduction in its stability index when the same math was applied. In addition, the panel noted that the right arm curve, or GZ curve, a graphic representation of the boat's stability, revealed Wingnuts to be just as stable inverted as she was right side up, sharply reducing any chance of recovering from a full capsize. We lost somebody in the 110th running of the race as well on July 21st, 2018. John Santarelli, a 53-year-old sailor aboard a Transpac 52 sailing vessel called Imedi. He slipped overboard during a wave strike about 5 nautical miles beyond the start line. After nearly 7 hours searching for and approximately 20 boats, 3 helicopters, U.S. Coast Guard, Chicago Fire, Chicago Police, and the Chicago Yacht Club, and a bunch of competing vessels, they all covered nearly 47 square miles, but then the search was suspended and Santarelli was presumed lost. On the afternoon of July 28th, nearly a week after the original incident, his body was recovered by a Chicago Police Marine unit about 6 miles offshore. The race to Mackinac is organized and managed primarily by the Mac Committee, a group of active Chicago Yacht Club members and volunteers. The committee represents the club as the race organizing authority and is led by a chairman. The committee planning process is all year. It's 12 months long and accounts for thousands of volunteer hours. The first Mackinac chairman was Mark H. Baxter in 1972-73 and then again in 77-78. Then there have been over 20 individuals who have led that committee. The Mackinac chairpersons have included some notables. At the age of 36, the youngest chairman ever to serve was Gregory Mariecki, and who coincidentally chaired the 100th running of the race in 2008, along with honorary chair Roy E. Disney, the monohull record holder. The first chairwoman was Miss Ann Moorman in 94-95. The first Hispanic to be appointed chairman was Louis Sandoval in 2012-13. The race to Mackinac has led in the use of technology in distance racing. In 2004, they debuted race tracking systems on a few select boats in the fleet. By 2006, the advances in technology and smaller size components, trackers and race tracking interfaces using GPS, became standard on every boat. Today, each boat is equipped with a small palm-sized messenger tracker that talks to satellites. It allows two-way communication of each boat's position on the race course and messaging capabilities. We routinely track our friends as they run the race, and we watch their progress from the internet. One member of my own yacht club races every year and has a knack for winning his class, which is single-handed on his Olsen 30. And that's right, a lot of people run this race single-handed. For a race that usually takes a lot longer than 24 hours, even for the best of crews. There's a special club of sailors who have completed 25 or more of these annual races, and they can apply for membership to the Island Goat Sailing Society, and are referred to as Old Goats or the Island Goats. In 1959, the Island Goat Sailing Society was formed with 10 of these such sailors, and it was to perpetuate and commemorate the Chicago to Mac race, along with its legends and lore. By 2019, the society has grown to 390 members in good standing. These videos are brought to you by patrons, people who give a couple of bucks an episode to make this all possible. If you'd like to help out, please consider becoming a patron. This has been another Historsea video, and I will see you next week.